Wouldn't you just look at him? Oh my gosh, it's sleeker, it's simpler. We've got all kind of shock options. Look at him go. Oh my freaking gosh. It's a Slayer freaking Pro, dude, on MEUS axles. What is up, crawler fans, RC enthusiasts, and social media surfers? I'm your boy Josh with Texoma RC, and you're looking at the Slayer Pro on the left is with the MEUS axles on the right, stock SCX 24 axles. Alright, Cage Slayer Pro recommended parts as running. We have the Texoma Cage Slayer Pro chassis kit, the Texoma long link set, running plus fronts for 162mm wheelbase at just 5 inches wide. That's pretty freaking awesome. Texoma MEUS shock, SOA, and link riser and diff skid pack. Pick it up. Texoma RAT'lers. We've got 34 grams of BBs in each front, 14 grams in each rear, 3mm MOFO brass hubs on the MEUS Isokinetic axles for the SCX 24 for great steering. MOFO bulletproof transmission, MOFO NANOBAM on a Furitek motor mount, MOFO Rockwolf ESC, MOFO Black Label 2.0 servo, Injora D-hole gladiator drive shafts, Injora 39mm oil-filled shocks with 80 weight oil, medium front springs, hard rear springs with 3 to 4 coils pulled on my spring mod, OVONIC 300 mod 2S lipo, all for a total weight of 512 grams, 6238 front weight bias. Alright, starting off with the long rears, we're going to need to separate these parts with a knife. Using our super thin CA glue and 2 8mm screws, we're going to run the 8mm screw through the foremost hole, tie it together just like this, add a drop of glue, remove the screw, there it goes, looks just like that. Go ahead and add on your rear skid just by aligning it as you see here. Next up, we're going to run the screws into the links, looking just like this. Next, we need 12mm screws and our rear shocks. As you see here, we have 3 coils pulled on our rear shocks with hard springs. Go ahead and run the screw through just a little bit. Back it up. There should be a little bit of junk that gets pushed through. Go ahead and remove that with your hobby knife. Next, go ahead and run the screw all the way through as you see here. Shocks mounted. Let's go ahead and get the links attached to the axle and the rear riser. Next, we're going to do the front uppers. Screws look just like this. They're going to attach to the back of the SOA. We're going to attach the lowers to the axle as well in the provided location. So you're going to grab your parts tree. You're going to remove the transmission skid. Need 10mm screws. Going to go ahead and get those started in there just like this. Just going to have about 2 or 3 threads sticking out, and that's so that you don't suck your link too tight to the wall. There you go. It should look just like this, and you get it installed to the transmission skid. The transmission skid is angled. It should be angled to the front. If for whatever reason you needed a little bit more room in the rear or whatever, you can angle it to the back, or you can just space the transmission up off of the skid just a little bit, with just using your screw. Next, we're going to need to remove our sliders from the parts tree. We're going to attach the sliders to the rails using 6mm screws, just like that. Going to go ahead and put a drop of glue. You could leave them on there if you wanted to, but I don't want to leave the screws, so we're going to put a drop of glue, remove the screws, looking pretty. Next up, we're going to go ahead and pre-install all of the 6mm screws into the rails. Should look just like this. Followed by, we're going to go ahead and install the 6mm screws into the cage. Just like we did before, we're going to run our screws through. Anything that has junk, go ahead and back the screw off like this and then clean it up. Should look just like that, nice and pretty. No extra junk between our parts. Alright, next we're going to go ahead and mount the cage with a rear screw to the chassis rail. The rest of it's going to be coming from the inside. Alright, here we go. After we got the cage to the chassis, we're going to go ahead and begin to attach all of these stuff to the inside of the chassis. Starting with the upper links. The rear links go in the rearmost hole for the cage, and that's what's actually holding the cage on. The frontmost hole, I started here, it's pictured with the screw in the lowest setting, and that's going to give me the most axle clock. I tried the farthest forward setting, and that was good as well, and then I ended up settling on the medium. Alright, next up we're going to attach the shocks to the cage using 12mm screws. We're going to go ahead and get them started, do the same thing, run them out, back them up, clean up any junk to get out of the way, shove the shock up in there, run your screw, Make sure that it goes all the way through. We're going to remove any excess with our nib. Should look like this, and then we're going to use a file or a Dremel or something to make sure it's not pokey. This picture here is just showing all the way to the front versus the all the way to the back setting like I had talked about on the front links. This is just showing what it would look like. Well, obviously it's super duper slammed, but you know, we do have less axle clock than we did before. Next, we're going to go ahead and remove the front and rear cross pieces from our tree. Go ahead and install the rear cross piece into the tree as done before. You can also cut the screws on the inside of those pieces or use a Dremel to make sure that they're smooth, just to make sure that they don't hit the rails or anything like that. And it's just makes it look clean. All right, we need two 8mm screws and our front cross piece. These are going to go into the rear holes of your front cross piece going outwards into the cage. Next, we're going to get our little rubber band catch piece for our bands in the front. We're going to put that into the hole just like that, and now we're going to install that onto the chassis. As you can see here on the cage, there is a little bit of screw sticking out. You could use a 6mm, or I like to just run it all the way through, and again to cut it and take it down with a file or the Dremel tool. Next, we're going to move on to the battery shock mount. We're going to need two 6mm screws at the bottom and two 6mm screws into our cross piece, which can be mounted down low and potentially run run your parts a little bit lower. Or what I found just works just as well is just to run it all the way up at the top, no matter what battery you're running. And then next, we're going to install our little extra shock mounts. These don't have to be installed if you're not using them. But if you're using the short fronts, you will probably likely use one of these two shock mounts if you're running in the upper shock mount position. That's what all this stuff is for, is different shock mounting positions. We're going to run it in the lower shock mounted position on the SOA riser. As you can see here, we have our full compression and our full dropout. Full compression. Looking good, dude. We got plenty of travel. Next, we're going to move on to this little crazy hook piece. We're going to install this. It goes right on the front of the transmission or the rear if you mounted your motor forward. So it's going to protect the drive shaft. It should clip up, especially if you have a metal transmission. It should clip up onto the transmission piece. And then your battery will sit right on top of this, making sure that it's not riding on the drive shaft. Your extra shock mounts, for anywhere that you would want to run them, they can be mounted on the inside and then stick out over the rail. They can be mounted on the outside of the rail. They can be used for inboarding or outboarding your shocks. Last thing we're going to do is install the Rip Till You Flip moniker logo on top of the roof using CA glue, just like we do with all of our plastic parts. And that's going to give you a freaking beautiful rig. This is just showing the alternative mounting position for the shocks on the upper and then mounted to the cage. Again, the shock mounts on the battery mount are made for the short fronts. We're running the long front to get us to 162mm, and that's where we're going to run it. And here's a better shot of that, just one more time. That's going to do it, folks. I freaking appreciate you guys. Holler at me with any questions. Freaking Rip Till You Flip.